Welcome to the Navigating Disruption podcast with Janet Hitchen and me, Mike Klein. Navigating Disruption is a podcast that aims to help leaders and organizations navigate the disruption that lies ahead. This episode, we speak with Christopher Wade. Chris is the VP for Internal Communication and Employee Engagement for Fresenius Medical Care. Fresenius Medical Care is the world's leading provider of kidney dialysis services and products, serving approximately 4.1 million patients worldwide who require regular treatment. Chris has a 20-plus year track record in the comms arena with a wide range of experiences in change, CSR, external communication, brand, and the coordination of communication teams around the world. A U.S. native, Chris has worked in Germany and Switzerland for the bulk of his career. Welcome to the podcast, Chris.
Thank you for having me. Nice to speak to you again, Janet and Mike.
Nice to have you. We're looking forward to this one. Let's start out with a pretty open question. What do you think the top 3 things communication professionals around the world should be thinking about at this moment?
It's a great one. I think there's obviously variance and it depends on where you're sitting, but for me, it's the oldie but goodie, but is how do you help your company succeed, right? And I always feel like it's straightforward and obvious, but sometimes I think, we can get so lost in the day-to-day tactical pieces of let me communicate this or communicate that piece of bespoke content, react to this particular crisis or issue, that we lose the big picture. Our ultimate job, and I'm speaking for myself, I'm keenly focused on the internal space and how you engage employees, is helping a company actually be more successful. And how do you help, and you mentioned a little bit, Mike, I've worked for mostly large Fortune 500 companies, Fortune 100 company, where you have 50, 100 plus thousand employees. How do you drive an engagement strategy that allows the messaging that starts at the top trickle down in a way that engages all of your colleagues, regardless of where they sit in an organization, what language that they speak, what culture that they operate in at that local level, and feels like they're part of a bigger mission, vision, purpose, but ultimately also driving operational performance, right? And whatever those larger targets are. And I don't think too many of us have found the secret sauce quite there yet. I think we've had successes in lots of ways. I've been fortunate enough to be in a few organizations where I think we were tremendously successful. But I think most aren't doing that. I think the space upwards for internal communication and employee engagement, I think we're like 15% there, is what I'm trying to say. I think the opportunities to do more the sky's the limit. And so I would say thinking in terms of business, how do we drive business performance would be my number 1. 2 is leveraging tech. And I say that both in, I think the evolvement and evolution of intranets has continued to proceed, and I've been, excited about some of the developments I've seen there in recent years, and also where's the journey going in the next few years. And I think obviously a critical component of it, and I'd be, silly not to mention AI, but it is true, right? The benefits for us are tremendous, right? And I don't, you hear a lot of discussion about how to use it, not to use it, experimenting with it. And there's obviously lots of details and aspects to it, but ultimately it's just going to be a tool to make us all smarter, better, faster, right? That's what it's doing. It's literally making us smarter, better, faster. It's like any tool in the history of humankind. Once we figured out how to use a rock to cut a piece of wood, holy cow, this is a game changer. All of a sudden we're starting to build things, right? And AI is similar. All of a sudden it is an extension of what we're going to be able to do into the future. And so I'm quite excited about that. And then I guess last, and this ties a little bit to the first one, how do you create culture in an organization? right? And we all know how tough this is, right? But how do you systematically create the desired culture you want in an organization? I think is a space that I'm still absolutely, just fascinated by and curious by, and love to experiment and test and try. And fortunate enough right now in my organization, and we're still very much in the early throes of it. We have a CEO, we have a management board that is keenly focused on how do we, what is our culture today and where do we want to take it to? And, working with our colleagues in HR as a core group, but really working with the entire management board about looking at how do we systematically, this is what our engagement surveys and other data that we've now gathered through focus groups over the last 6 months is telling us this is where we think we want to go. And we're right now having that confirmed through focus groups of our employees telling us as well, again, and validating that also in our global employee engagement survey. But then how do we then now implement that? How do we embed that into the organization? And that's the trick. The work we're doing now, I think a lot of companies have done, some better, some less good. But point is, once you have an aspiration, how do you actually systematically embed that into the org? So those would be.
Let me follow up with a couple questions on that, because I definitely see the challenge, but what I don't understand is what's going on in the background in your organization.
Yeah.
How diverse it is, how many people you've got. I know that you've got a huge operation in the US, but I don't know what the rest of your world looks like. And then obviously you've got the different workplace dynamics that you have in Germany, the US, and in other countries.
Yeah.
How does that all fit together?
Yeah. So Fresenius Medical Care, we have about 120,000 employees, I think 117,000 latest number, in about 50 countries where we actually operate in. We sell our tech, our medical technology, our med tech, and our products and solutions. So the kind of consumables that are part of that med tech in over 150 countries. Of those 120,000, about 50% do sit in the U.S. Okay. And we are a medical care, healthcare company, but we are focused on the kidney. Right, and the primary area of business revenue is dialysis. Not only, we also are a leader in critical care machines used in a lot of intensive care units around the world. It's funny. I was talking to a friend the other day, and they're like, "Oh, Fresenius Medical Care, that's who you work for." Oh, and I think her mother, and obviously sad situation, was on a Fresenius Medical Care machine, which was keeping her alive. So, we are diversified to some degree, but the vast majority of our business relates to the kidney. So, 50 countries, all the diversity you can experience under that. 50% of our employees outside the U.S., 50% within the U.S. So we're quite diverse organization overall.
I want to come back to one of the first things that you just said, because those three things, you kind of we could have podcasts for the next, we have 10 podcasts on those three things that you've just said. But helping the business succeed, and you said you think we're about 15% done.
Yeah.
Internal comms has been around in multiple formats for over 30 years. Why the hell are we only 15% done? What's getting in the way? What's going wrong?
So let me say a couple things to that. And I just threw the 15% number out there. Maybe that was a slight exaggeration or a bit provocative.
I bet. Okay. I bet.
Yeah. I want a conversation here, right? So.
Hello. Thanks for tuning in to another episode. If you're enjoying the podcast, we'd love your support in helping us reach more listeners. The best way to do that is hit the subscribe button in your podcast app. It's completely free and means you never miss an episode. And if you found value in today's content, we'd love you to take a second to leave us a rating or a review. Your support really makes a difference in helping others discover this podcast. Plus, it lets us know what resonates with you so we can keep bringing you more of what you care about. Thanks and take care from me, Janet in London, and Mike in Iceland.
I'm with you, Chris. I think 15% is a legit baseline.
Yeah. And why I say that is because a couple reasons. One, it's been around for 30 years. That's, not quite as long as I've been doing this, but I've been around long enough to basically have joined at the kind of fledgling inception of this. And I think a big part of it has come about with technology, right? Interestingly enough, I think the fact that you could have a global intranet versus, you do a local newspaper, or maybe have something printed within a local market, but it was just so impossible to wrap your hands around before the advent of technology, like emails, like an intranet, like video communications, town halls, global town halls, that it just wasn't really feasible in the past, at least in a systematic way, right? And so I say, a couple reasons. One, I think the tech still has huge room to improve.
Yeah.
My company, we've gotten the support of our management board to roll out a new global intranet, and we'll be doing this in 2025. And I'm keenly aware of, through my other previous experiences at other companies, of the low mobile usage. For diversity of legitimate reasons, right? Outside of work, do I really need to be paying attention to what's happening within work? Even getting people to voluntarily download a work mobile application to their private phones.
Yeah.
And once I'm on there, is this just a news feed for what, corporate, maybe local channels just trying to push to me, or what's the relevance for me?
Yeah.
So I think the opportunities to further leverage tech, as the tech develops and we get smarter and there's more opportunities for targeting and making it very local, making it very relevant, and empowering local leaders to make it a powerful, relevant tool for them, I think there's huge space there. The other more probably bigger picture part to your question, Mike, I think is we're still often enough in a bit of a bubble, right? It's in internal comms, employee engagement. We are coming up with strategies and ideas. We want to communicate this and we communicate that. And depending on what your organization is and your access to leadership, maybe you're getting that support and approval, and then you're doing regular newsletters, communications, town halls. Maybe you're localizing it with a network of communicators who are helping translate that and, transcreate that content so it fits the local really tenor and tone and how applicable that content is for that local audience.
Yeah.
But even so, how's that same message getting trickled down through leadership? How is that same message getting trickled throughout the organization in a way that you're creating bottom up, horizontal, every which way,
multi-directional,
how is this starting to create, how is this starting to trend in an organization, an important message, right? Not everything is going to be important for everyone all of the time, but some messages are. And some kind of universal truths or red line you should be able to hit that drum beat and it becomes alive in an organization. And I don't see many organizations who are systematically good at this and continuously doing it in a way that is measurable.
What would it take for what do you think would take for someone to get good at this? And I say this as somebody who actually teaches on the subject. I'm curious as to what you think good looks like.
Yeah. I mean, I don't have the answers here yet. I have some experience. And in particular, I was at one organization where basically there was, from the top, a demand to drive more employee engagement, to drive business operational performance.
Okay.
And this leader just had, I'll just say, this person just kind of knew what they wanted and said, we're going to put some dollars behind this, and myself and my leadership team is going to get behind this. And, it was an ideal situation where we were able to develop programs that rolled out across 100,000 plus employees in a short time frame And when I say something rolled out, I don't mean just a communication and a poster. I mean 2-day intensive engagement training sessions where you connected with employees on what is important for the organization around behaviors and values, and how those are lived and breathed, around the key areas of business focus and strategy and where we want to head to, the company's purpose and building a greater sense of pride and connection to that. And it was done, one, with speed and urgency. So it was tracked how many people are going through this program.
Yeah.
And then it was correlated to employee engagement, and employee engagement was correlated to business performance, which was correlated to then customer satisfaction and ultimately to business profitability. And a critical piece of this rollout, what was so important about it is that it wasn't HR driven or an external agency who designed something and then they came in with their facilitators and did it. Yes, HR was a critical partner, and yes, we worked with external partners to design these multi-day interactive sessions, but the rollout was the rollout had to be embedded in the organization. So if there was the leadership, if it was a leadership forum, it was about being a better leader to drive what we want to go forward. It was leaders within the organization who participated in the leadership session, then were trained on how to deliver it, and they delivered it. So there were no external facilitators delivering the leadership training. It was people who maybe you know or didn't know, but they were part of your organization and they could talk to the realities of this is our strategy, or this is our purpose, or this is how you're a better leader, this is how you deliver feedback. This is how I used to do it, and I'm still on the journey, but this is how I've learned to do it better, and this is how we're going to talk to you about delivering feedback to drive ultimately better operational performance, starting with your own team. And so when you have leaders within the organization doing that, starting with the CEO and his or her leadership team, and that trickles down, and every layer gets to see leaders within the organization delivering that level of engagement, taking people off the shop floor for 2 days, away from their prestige for 2 days. Everybody has to do this. This is the expectation of how we do it going forward. And then that isn't a one-off, but repeated year after year after year. And then the whole organization's whole leadership and development model was attached to that. Yeah. So this wasn't an initial engagement session, but if it was about driving, finance transformation, new ways of working, standard operating procedures, the same level of approach was taken. Everyone in finance had to do it, and it was people within finance driving that down into the organization. And yes, there were facilitators and people who supported that, because not, every leader's going to have the time to do that all on their own. So it was always a hand in hand, and those people mostly sat within HR who might co-facilitate a session, but you had people within finance driving that. And so the last thing I will say that was really interesting there is those 2-day sessions, how they were delivered. So it wasn't, obviously death by PowerPoint, but it was very, very, the level of organizational psychology and behavioral psychology applied to it was just really smart and fun. It was engaging. So it was videos, it was dialogue, it was interactive. The groups were small, right? It was 20 people max. You make it intimate. A lot of this was pre-COVID, so I haven't experienced how they're doing it post-COVID. I know they've redesigned their whole ways of doing it to a virtual capability, but that face-to-face is still something different. So it's always very local. You would have teams across, cross functions come together depending on the training where it made sense, or you would have your finance team or HR or ops or whatever it is. And so, coming full circle, if you decide to put in the time and money to design smart, engaging, interactive, dynamic sessions that, take an organizational behavioral psychology approach to how do you get people to understand what you're trying to do, get on board, have fun doing it so it embeds itself better, and we'll take that away with them and even speak highly of this, 3-hour to 2-day session I participated in. And everyone in an organization has to go through that in a quick timeline. And then as you start to break down all these different elements of training according to function, according business of area of your business, and it becomes systematically embedded into the way you do business, you can start to shift an organization in a significant way. And I was fortunate enough to be around for that and play my part within that, and just see engagement scores go up, see operational performance go up, see profitability go up, and the leaders, the first ones talking about investing into the people, is what delivered this success. So that's the experience I've had. It's a model I'd like to be able to replicate, at Fresenius Medical Care. And I think we have a great team together looking at that. Something bespoke for this organization and the types of employees we have and the sector we're in and the culture that's existing. It has so many positive traits to it, building upon those strengths and then also identifying those areas where, hey, this is what employees are telling us we need to improve, and how do we systematically tackle those, that employees feel the difference, across the organization.
But what you're describing sounds, I've lived that in one organization I worked for. And yet when you see it happen, it's absolutely magical, because you're like, it can happen. Yes. But it requires huge amounts of investment. It requires an understanding from not just the CEO, but the CFO, because sometimes you get a CEO who says, I want to do this. And the CFO goes, yeah, no. And so you get all the lovely smiles, and then you have to fight to get, £3.50 to spend on anything, where actually what you need is 350,000. So is therefore, what am I trying to say here? What I'm trying to say is the work that we're doing at the moment, where we know that teams don't get the budget, they know they don't get the allocation that they need, is that tinkering worth it? Yeah. Or actually, do people need, it's like, if you're in, you need to be all in, because if you're all in, as you said, you could see and you could connect the dots to the ROI, to the business change, to the business transformation, to the productivity, to the revenue, to the share price, etc., etc. So is this a case of either just do it, if you're going to do it properly, or if you're not going to, if you're going to just tinker around the edges with a newsletter and a town hall once a quarter?
Well, a good town hall or a good newsletter, I'm a big fan. Just want to call that out very significantly. I invest, in my team, we put time into those things, try to be thoughtful about them and make them interesting and increase views and clicks and, follow through, and people follow that content to the internet. So all those things are important. So, to your question, you can't climb Mount Everest in a day, right? This is all uncharted territory. And to your point, the level of investment required, when I think about at that company where we did that, some real money and time was spent there. Yeah. And again, it was a perfect situation where the demand came from the top, and the top was willing to invest into it, and it trickled out. It just trickled out from there. And so, if the demand isn't from the top, can you convince someone to give that level of investment who hasn't decided that I'm all in on this? Let me take a step back. It's a little bit like religion, right? Are you someone, you go to church on Christmas and Easter, or do you go every Sunday and, sit down and read the Bible every evening after dinner, right? And, if you're just going on Sundays and Easter, you're probably not going to be able to convince someone to put that level of investment in. Now, if even going every Sunday, you might be able to say, hey, let's start going, let's go to Bible study twice a week too, that type of thing. Yeah. I'm not a religious person, not that it matters. I just want to call that out. But
it's a good paradigm, though.
It's a good analogy. Don't knock it.
And, so if you're, how do you get the Easter Sundays, to jump to, I don't know, Sunday school for the kids, whatever it is, like what is the gateway to get them to start to see that there's some advantages to investing into it? If you come at them with Mount Everest in one day, if you tell them they need to start going to Bible study every day, the deal's done.
It's interesting, since we're in this space of talking about religion, talking about level of faith, level of commitment, what have you.
Yeah.
What moves people are miracles. So, and miracles can happen in a matter of moments, and miracles that happen in a matter of moments can now spread globally in a matter of seconds. So, I'm not somebody who's been a big believer in all employee engage-a-thons. I mean, I'm glad that you've had great success with it. I'm glad that yours is a miraculous case study that supports an entire industry of folks out there.
Hmm.
Um, but I guess the issue is, in the absence of that, what can we do to create the conditions for miracles in this space?
Yeah. Gosh, that's a great question. I mean, I think it is, I don't want to call it luck, but it's particular to a situation, right? Who are your leaders, right? What is their appetite? I've been at a number of organizations. They're all interested in culture. Like I haven't hit any CEO who was like, culture, who cares, right? You at least have their ear, and they'll listen to they'll have a conversation with you, and some are more open to doing things, more so than others. That's one part. The second part is, where is your company at, right? If you're in a financially constrained situation, the willingness to try something this innovative is going to be much lower than if you're in a company that's, the cash is, shooting out the ears, right? I mean, you might be able to go to, I don't know, to the CEO of Google and be like, hey, I have this idea. Should we try this? And it's like, sure, it's going to cost $5 million. Who cares? Go for it, right? That's how much they spend on their local cafeteria, in Silicon Valley. I'm being a little bit facetious here, but you get my point. Like the criticality of that is much lower, right? Our CEO and our managing board, they're fully invested, right? And they are supporting it. And, we are discussing budgets, and they are keen, and we're going to look at what's doable and not. But I'm not going to ask for 20 million year one, right? And so I think it's those circumstances. That's a little bit the frame that you work within. And so I think it's about taking bite-sized chunks, right? And maybe you're in a space where you can ask for a whole slice or half a pizza or the whole pizza, but maybe in a place you're like, oh, can I try that? That looks tasty. And then I think it tastes good. You want to try too. So. I don't have the magic solution to your question, Mike, but what I would say is, in an environment where resources are low or buy-in isn't high, pilot. Find a leader who is supportive of it. Find someone who says, hey, I don't have the budget within employee comms and internal comms, but, I've convinced a stakeholder who's willing to throw 50K, 100K at this, 20K, whatever it is. Let's use let's build a network of like-minded colleagues within an organization. Say, hey, we want to do this work. Let's collaborate on that together. And the person leading this culture work we're doing within Fresenius Medical Care, we're most, the core team is really HR and my team, but we're obviously working with others, and really fantastic work with minimal external resources to do these focus groups at a local level. So we're leveraging our own colleagues, right? And then we're walking them through that, and then they're conducting the trainings, with 8 to 10 to 12 people, and asking them about what's working today and not, and where do we want to go, and what resonates with them and what not, as we look at, our company today and where we want to take it. And so cost has been minimal now. What that ultimate degree of investment will be, we shall see. But the value is seen there. The impetus to start this journey came from them, and they've been engaged and putting in their own time and energy and thoughts throughout this process.
Want to explore the burning questions your C-suite and clients are asking? Then you should consider the next Navigating Disruption Mastermind. Janet and I will challenge and coach you in an 8-session program. You'll join other Navigating Disruption listeners and other senior comms pros. For more information, follow the Navigating Disruption page on LinkedIn.
But I think of just the way that you've described how you're doing it as well. If you think of each of those things that you've said to people who are part of the organisation, you're going to learn how to do a focus group. You're going to learn how to run this. There's a huge amount of professional development that is involved along the way. So what you're getting as a byproduct, you're getting great stuff, because you're like, yeah, my project's moving forward. I'm getting great employee listening. I'm getting great employee analysis. This is absolutely wonderful. But the people who are all taking part are getting a professional development that they wouldn't normally have. And it's that thing of, did you have any professional development this year? No, I didn't sit in a classroom. And it's like, well, you don't have to sit in a classroom. There's lots of other ways that you can be developed and learn on the job. And I know it sounds trite when I'm going, learning on the job, you're just being cheap. And I've had it said to me before, it's like, oh, but that's just cheap because you're not going to invest in us. It's like, no, but we're going to give you the time. And if you look at, because a CFO will not just look at the figures of how much is it going to cost to bring in external investor, external people, what's that budget line? But they'll also look at, okay, if I take this number of people, how much does it cost for 1 hour of manager at level 1, level 2, level 3? I understand how much that's going to cost me if if they do that, so you understand what that costs. And I worked in an organization where we did that. So when we said everybody gets 15 minutes a day to look at communication internally so that they know what they need to do for their day, they know what's happening, we knew what that cost because the CFO had given us and calculated what 15 minutes a day looked like. When the organization was several thousand people, when the organization went from 2,000 people in Europe to 13,000 people, we still knew what that cost. And it was still that's what you've got, that's what you can play with. So I think there's so much there. There's the development piece, there's the what does it cost in order to be able to look at that? How do you actually absorb that against a training budget that, you might have to send some people. There's so much balancing that you can do there. It's quite inspiring to hear those sorts of things.
Yeah, no, I can only agree. And, we're still in the middle of the journey. We're still in the fledgling stage, right? Yeah. I mean, nothing is designed yet as far as how to roll out and implement. And then this is a multi-year journey, right? Like this isn't going to happen fast. It's going to take time to, really, track, and measure the impact of what we're looking at doing today.
Yeah.
And it's important, and I'll say at the organization where we did this before, obviously everyone was involved. Yes, we had the CEO, but, working with the strategy, working with HR, working with ops, working with we were all, it was together, and there was a common goal approach, right? We know what we want to do. We're all looking at the outcomes of this. Let's get behind it together. And, feeling, like we're doing something, exciting, and then seeing some of these programs and hit the ground and seeing the impact that has, right? So I think that's tremendous. And just one last point, Janet, we were tracking, time off of your job, right? Yeah. So, if you're looking at taking someone off for 3 hours or a full day or 2 days,
what's the cost?
What is the cost of that? So that was, fully loaded costs were looked at and tracked.
Yeah, which is, I think, it's one of those things when you're in a discovery phase like that, it allows the CFO to sort of see that you're taking things seriously and you're not just spending money willy-nilly and you're not just kind of throwing it out there. It's like we're being, we're being prudent, we're being sensible with the money that we have because we know that we want to do something further down the line. But at the discovery phase, here's some of the other things that you're going to get out of the discovery phase that aren't simply... So I'll leave it there.
I'm gonna ask about another multi-year journey, though. Not the multi-year journey of your organization, but the multi-year journey of Chris Wade. One of the hallmarks of your career has been service in a number of very senior positions in very large organizations, DHL, Wholesome, Adecco, and now your current organization, Fresenius Healthcare. What do you think were the main things that have allowed you to move into these positions and sustain a career at that level?
Well, it helps. There's two parts of this. How did I reach that level the first time? And then, because once you're there, it's easier, you've done it once. So now people, there's more interest, right, at that stage. How did I get there? I think there's a couple core components. One is, I've always been someone who, and not that this has always been healthy, especially if you ask my wife, but I work hard, right? And it's my natural character. workaholic. I don't know if that's the right term, but I like outcomes. And I generally, I want to support and collaborate with people. So I tend to, especially when you're doing this job, right? I mean, I'm always a little cautious around this because I do not want to, step on the toes of my colleagues in other areas of communications. But for me, I am like, this is where I want to be, is that employee engagement space. That is my, I don't want to say raison d'être. It's a little bit too high-minded, but that's my sweet spot. This is where I like to work. I think media is fascinating. I think it's great. I think social is really awesome, but I'm keen on that. Engagement drives operational performance. That's the space I want to work in. And to do that, I need to understand the whole organization. And so that means I like to collaborate with people. And that means I am reaching out, building networks, and helping. And if I understand the business well, then I can communicate it well.
Yeah.
And now, of course, that'll keep you busy. If everyone's reaching out to you for counsel and advice, you need to be able to manage that and measure that. And depending on the size of your team, kind of have a clear goal of where are you going to add the most value, because you can't do everything all the time, then you'll get nothing done, right? So, but to answer your question, I think I've been good at understanding how to drive business performance, and I've been good at being able to see eye to eye with your uppermost leadership. So if I'm sitting down with the CEO or management board members or other stakeholders within an organization, I'm always asking the questions that help me understand what their challenges are, which helps me find solutions for them, right? And sometimes they're communication solutions, sometimes have nothing to do with comms, and I'm just throwing out an idea, and the person's like, well, wait a minute, that's not bad. Let me take that to my team, right? Just because I'm curious and interested. But then hopefully I'm also finding communication solutions for them too, which are smart, effective, and help them feel like it's, helping them do their jobs better, which builds trust. And so I think if you're helping, your stakeholders do their jobs better, then, hopefully your reputation will grow and you'll get promoted. And I was fortunate enough in my career to be promoted without, having raised my hand several times. Because I think people saw that I was working hard and trying to get things done and building good relationships and having good outcomes. And then, I think once you reach a certain level, sometimes it's a reality of it, but, kind of headhunters out there in the world, they start to see you and then you start getting phone calls, right? So that's one of the reasons why I've been at a few different organizations. Someone calls or you build your network and then, something pops up and you decide to take a leap for something new and different.
I'm really interested in the fact that you are a US citizen who spent most of their time outside of the US.
Yes.
What advantage, what has that given you an edge? Has that given you an advantage? What do you think that brings when you are working in an environment that is, you could say it's a different definitely a different country, but different culture, different way of being, different. How does that bring you something unique and important and valuable?
Yeah, I have two answers to that question. The first part is I am a military brat, so my dad was in the U.S. Air Force. So we moved around a lot as a kid. Okay. And so I lived, and my short version of this is always 7 cities and 3 countries by the time I hit 18. So nice. Including in Germany, right? So I lived in Germany as a kid and went to German public school in Germany. Okay. So there's a natural advantage. I didn't come blindly, out of college over here. That is how I ended up here now. But, I lived here as a kid and had spoke the language to a certain degree and all of these things. So that's an important, I think, marker to call out for the listeners. It's not like I picked up German just magically. I learned it when I was a kid.
With all those different cases, I would have been really, really impressed if you just picked it up, because I did it at school and I was just like, as soon as
and I still don't speak it perfectly. Do not ask me to write a grammatically correct German sentence. For the press release. Do not.
The different cases, I was always just like, time out. It's too much for me. French, 100%. I'm all over it, but the cases just broke me.
No, same here. I'll never master it as long as I've been here. But an important part of that, it's not just that I had lived abroad, it's that I learned to live in different places a
Yeah.
lot, right? So I learned to meet new people, adapt to new cultures. I lived in, you know, went to German public school starting at 8 years old, where, I was the only black kid. I didn't speak German. It was a very different world than the world that I had lived in before. And then moving back to
Yeah.
the States, where, from basically all German, white kids to living in an American school that was 70% black kids again, right? So like you learn to adapt. And then I moved to New Mexico, which has a huge Hispanic population, Native American population. So you learn to adapt to new cultures, new languages, new environments. And so I think that helped me moving into an organization like this, where you have different people, different backgrounds, different cultures that kind of learn to adapt. So I think that's been very helpful for me. That's something that's a little bit built into my character at this stage. And then obviously the German background. But that said, being a U.S. citizen is a huge advantage in communications in Europe, where for global multinationals, and I'm not so interesting for a mid-sized or small German organization that's either only local or maybe they have some branches outside.
Yeah.
I'm probably, it's not who they're looking for. It's not my wheelhouse, right? So I'm interesting to the big multinationals who most are speaking English to the vast majority, at a global scale to their employees, and things can get localized. So being an English native speaker, 100% confident in my writing skills, penmanship skills, ghostwriting skills, is a huge benefit. And, I would recommend any English native speaker looking to move into a non-English speaking country at a multinational, there's opportunities there. And you'll see it, if you, spend enough time, and you guys obviously speak to tons of them. There's lots of English native speakers, wherever they're from, in these types of roles, because it does bring an advantage. Not always.
Yeah, I've been that person several times. So.
There you go, right? So it's been a huge benefit for me. And, I slipped into this space. I didn't decide to study it. I'm going to do communications. I studied, I did a double major in German and English literature and creative writing. I thought I was going to write novels, science fiction novels.
You may still.
And I may still, absolutely, Jen, 100%. That dream has not been given up. But, I met who is now my wife, which is why I ended up in Germany. And so she was, still doing her master's. I moved over here, and we've been in Europe ever since. But if you're proactively looking to do communications, I think being an English native speaker outside of the U.S. can, it is an additional differentiator for you.
Let's talk about Germany for a second. I mean, I've had an interest in internal comms in Germany since the early 2000s, because I kind of saw both culturally and philosophically internal comms move in different directions between the US and the UK. On one hand, ironically focusing on employee engagement, and in Germany focusing a bit more on, whether direct relationship with performance, or, the involvement of employees more in the management of work. What do you think the rest of the world can learn from Germany from an internal comms perspective?
Oof, gosh, that is a great question.
It's a big old question.
It is, right? And because
I like asking big questions.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, what's super can be challenging in Germany is not, some of the challenges with, works council, employee representative groups who have a lot of co-determination and influence. So if you're in a company that especially is headquartered in Germany, there can be huge amounts of influence. Having worked at Deutsche Telekom, Deutsche Post DHL, now DHL Group, they have, 50,000 civil servants still in their workforce, as former, government organizations that would then privatize in the 90s and IPO'd and then went on global shopping sprees and became these truly global organizations, still having a little bit of this, old world, if you will, to some degree, kind of employee base can, create a bit of a dichotomy of the expectations of Germany versus the rest of the world. And so, that experience aside, I think what is helpful what you can learn from that process is certainly getting employees on board early, right? Helping them understand what the change is, making them feel like they're part of the process. It can be, cumbersome if there's a co-determination right. And, the Works Council as such is a cautious group. So, if you want to be creative, if you want to be innovative, if you want to be fast, that can be a hindrance to that, right? Because, that is not the nature of how they operate. So that's, I guess an opposite of what your question was. But I think, coming back to my point earlier, is involving employees early, making them feel part of the process, getting their inputs and ideas, and allowing, through focus groups, surveys, individual contributors to be part of your project and getting their inputs on that. I can be, it's always a good idea to help, shape your user experience, the outcome of what you want to happen, and whatever your outcomes are.
I know, just building on what you just said there, Chris, I worked in an organisation which was global, and works councils were a huge thing. And when it went badly, that meant that we would roll something out to everywhere but Germany. Which from a communications perspective became really tricky, because then, so you've done the rollout of the thing, let's call it, I don't know, lampshade. So you've rolled out lampshade, and then suddenly you've got lots of other things where you need to talk about lampshade, but you can't talk about lampshade for Germany. So you can talk about lampshade for everything else, but you can't use that in Germany. So we would always have to be doing bespoke content, constantly looking at, and we had a tool where we could clip and we could do snippets, so we could take words out for specific languages and say, remove that for French, remove that for German. But the ability and the mental flexibility and agility that you had to have to remember that thing you can't say, because if you do talk about lampshade, the works councils are going to jump up and down. So that's not okay. And actually the process of that one of the teams went through to actually understand, how do we engage our works councils up front? Because they realised that there were several times where it was very, very painful, and they were like, we need to take this pain away. How can we stop this pain? And they realised that it was by embracing, and it was by leaning in, and it was by actually getting closer, so that the trust developed, so that, as you say, the caution kind of not went away, but there was a greater level of trust to say, okay, you're not trying to do something against us. You're not trying to do something to have one over on us. Actually, we're working to make the experience, either employee or customer or both, better. And so actually that then meant that it was much easier from a communication standpoint, because we didn't need to have multiple different versions of, and have we remembered that when we're translating for 16 different languages, actually that one needs to remove that reference, because otherwise that could get us into trouble legally. And it took that away. And I think leaning in with the works councils, creating the relationships, and we didn't own the relationships, it was other partners that owned them, but actually ultimately the outcomes for us were that we had a much easier time, and we didn't need to have that sort of oh shit moment, frankly, of this thing is going to publish. Did we remember to remove that reference to whatever it might be for that country? And I think that was huge.
Yeah, no, it is significant. And I think, the trick here is, as you said it, right? So I'm 100% with you. Involve them early, make them part of the process, plan out your projects accordingly. That's the only way you're going to succeed. And if you're a Germany headquartered company, especially, it's even more so, right? And, wouldn't share any other advice.
But this was good. Thank you, Chris.
This was phenomenal.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I thought it was a rich conversation, as always. And by the way, I love this podcast. I feel so honored, because so many, I haven't listened to all of them yet, but I've listened to a bunch. And every time I'm like, just really smart, good people on these calls where I'm like, this is a must listen. Like, it's a great podcast. And starting with that first one you kicked off with, Mike, I thought it was like really, really fantastic. And, you guys combining together, just thank you for thinking of me and having me join you. It's highly appreciated.
So that was a hell of a conversation. What did you think, Janet?
I absolutely loved it. I think Chris always comes across in a very calm, very considered way, but he actually drops a lot of real gold. And those three things that we started with, we could have had a podcast on each one of those things. That was amazing. So the helping the business succeed, something that we've talked about in the podcast before, and I think it's something that a lot of people are starting to get on board with, that you have to be supporting the business. The business needs to be productive. It needs to create revenue. It needs to create, if you have shareholders, it needs to create shareholder value. And if you're not doing, an easy way of getting support for what you want to do is to support the business. And then I really enjoyed the conversation where we got into how to create culture in an organization. And some of the stuff that he was talking about there does not require huge budgets. It does not require I must go out with an enormous RFP and go and get consultants that cost millions. But what it is it's a really thoughtful discovery, and it's an organic discovery phase where people are learning and getting professional development through the discovery. So the comms team are getting some absolute gold dust. The rest of the organization is getting some really great stuff. The CFO is not spending a lot of money. They're spending time, which obviously has a monetary value. But I thought that the intentionality of what he was talking about, how intentional he was with that discovery phase, absolutely loved that.
Well, what I thought was really profound about this was the fact you've got a guy in Chris Wade who has gotten himself into a senior enough position where he can operate systemically. And by operating systemically, he could actually leverage the resources inside the system to drive the agenda, which is a nirvana state for 95% of communication professionals out there.
Yeah.
The challenge is that if you're not able to operate systemically, it's difficult to do this. But if you can operate systemically and you've got senior level sponsorship, then you don't even need a senior level budget to do this. It's often a paradox.
The
more traction you have, the less resources you need.
I think what's really interesting is, as you say, he's got himself into a position where he's incredibly senior. He's got access to the board. He's got access to C-suite. I don't know if he sits in C-suite or not. Doesn't matter. He is at a level where he is having those conversations. But I think what's really useful for an organization, maybe you're somebody who doesn't have access to the board, is sitting outside and is still banging on about the fact that you need a seat at the table. What he gives you and what he's talking about gives you case studies. So you can get your Harvard Business Review case study. You can go and look at what Hubert Jolly did in Best Buy. You can go and look at what Tim Cook did at Apple. You can look at all of that stuff. But actually what he's doing here is he's giving you access to somebody who's accessible. Hubert Jolly's not accessible. Tim Cook's not accessible, but Chris is.
Yeah, Chris is very accessible.
And he's giving you a really simple, clear case study on if you want to start to understand your organization better and have that culture conversation. If you can't yet have the culture conversation with your leadership because they're not ready to do it, he's giving you some real simple discovery ideas that you can put in place that aren't going to cost for any money. They might need some support and some help, but they're not going to cost anything. That will help you build that business case to go to the C-suite to say, here's what I found out so far. Will you allow me to go to the next stage? Will you allow me to do more? And I think making that business case and making that work, particularly the discovery work, that accessible, I really liked.
I mean, really what listening to Chris gives you access to is if you really want to attack this systemically and systematically, there are a series of interventions you can do at a very low risk, low cost level that builds that business case. And I think that's the lesson a practitioner in any organization can take from this conversation. I think there's a lot of other things we can talk about. I mean, one thing we didn't talk about that I really wanted to talk about was the not just the works councils, but the fundamental nature of employment in Germany. That in Germany, when you work for an organization, you have rights,
Hmm.
and that internal communication has to respect those rights.
Yeah.
That's a completely different paradigm to what they're used to using, particularly in the US and in the Anglo Saxon world in general. And maybe there's another conversation to have, whether it's with Chris or whether it's somebody else, about how can we bring that to internal communication more broadly.
I think it doesn't need to be someone who is just based in Germany. I think it helps if you have an understanding of the German system. But if you've worked in a global organization, you have run into German works councils, how you handle things in Germany, how you communicate, and what you need to take into consideration in Germany. So I think I absolutely agree. I think it would be great if we could kind of dig there a little bit more and kind of mine that seam more. I think people would be interested in understanding that. And what perspective does that give you? Because I think sometimes, having worked in a global organization and had that some of those challenges, you learn from what those challenges bring you, and you bring that into the rest of your organization. Because sometimes, I think, like anything, if you add additional parameters into something, it makes you work harder. It makes you think smarter. You can't just default think. You have to make it. You have to think a lot more clearly about what you're doing. And that's what happened when we worked with Germany. That's when we learned more about how works councils work. So I think we can absolutely find some. Either Chris, or for part 2, or somebody who's working in a global organization who kind of leans heavily in that area.
Excellent. Well, thanks for, again, another fantastic conversation of navigating disruption.
Thanks, Mike.